In 1892, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle released a collection of short stories, of course, based on a Sherlock Holmes character. And now there was one story titled Silver Blaze. It was about the disappearance of a famous racehorse and the murder of that horse's trainer. And so you had one scene where the Scotland Yard detective said, "Is there any other point to which you would wish to draw my attention?" To where Holmes replied, "To the curious incident of the dog in the nighttime." Then Gregory, the detective, said, "The dog did nothing in the nighttime." Holmes replied, "That was a curious incident. Hence, the dog that did not bark." Of course, that helped save the case, and it's entered our lexicon ever since. And I want to paraphrase it today and ask about the recession that did not bite. Joining me now, Bianco Research President Jim Bianco. So, Jim, when is this recession going to bite?
It doesn't look like it's going to bite anytime soon. I mean, there are business cycles, and 6 months, 12 months, 18 months from now, we could be in a far different position. But you, Charles, remember like I do back on January 1st, everybody was saying by mid-year, we would be in recession. And today, June 30th, is exactly mid-year, and we're nowhere near a recession right now.
Yeah, so interesting. I mean, we do a lot of TV, and we're in this sort of prediction game, and recessions are inevitable. So we know there's going to be a recession. I can't wait for one to happen. But we also know the people who take the victory lap like next August are going to be like, "Come on now, my man, you said it. You're about 2 years behind." But that's the way it works on Wall Street, anyway. But before we celebrate, you do have an important point, and that's about inflation reinflating.
Yeah, because what's going to happen on two levels. There's a base effect in inflation. The numbers from last year, you might remember exactly a year ago, we were all worried because we had $5 a gallon gasoline and we're well off that. We're going to drop those numbers. So you're going to see a big decline in inflation for the June numbers when they're reported next month. And that should be the bottom, and they should start to drift higher. And I want to emphasize that word drift. Then you can add into that, look, if we've got no recession and the economy stays strong, and if the housing market is starting to turn, and we can maybe see an uptick in home prices, or at least a stopping of the downtick in home prices, to use bad English there, you could potentially see more inflation. And so, yes, while that sounds good for the economy and that sounds good for the stock market, we'll have to contend with more rate hikes and higher interest rates as we move forward.
Those rate hikes, I want to ask you about that because massive amounts are being pouring into bonds. I read somewhere it could be like a record amount right now. After that 60-40 debacle last year with stocks and bonds, it felt like maybe bonds was the place to be this year. What happens to bond investors if these rates keep going up?
Depends on where they are. If a lot of the bond investors are moving into short-term interest rates that have very little price risk to them, or duration risk, as we call it in bond land, they should be okay because they're getting a 5% or maybe even more than a 5% yield, and they'll take a little bit of a loss, but they'll be fine. They'll get some number up there. If they're taking longer term risk and they're buying 10 or 20 or 30-year bonds, they might have some kind of a concern there because the price losses could be a lot more. But the reason that they're all moving into bonds is because for the first time in 16 years, there's actually a yield in the bond market, and that's what's really been attracting a lot of people.
Before I go, you do great work around election season. I already saw you posted one of those betting site charts. We've got these two major Supreme Court rulings in the last 24 hours. They're going to be fodder for the election. Do you think they'll be big enough to really move the needle to one way or the other?
That's going to be a tough one because the Dobbs ruling last year on abortion was really a outlier, that it meant a Supreme Court ruling that actually affected the next election. That almost never happens. So at this point, it doesn't look like in 18 months that they're going to, and it's been reflected in the betting markets because they've hardly moved off this news, where last year when we got the Dobbs ruling, they moved a lot.
Yeah. Jim, thank you so much. Always appreciate your expertise. Have a great weekend, my friend.
Thank you. You too.
All right, folks.